Well, our next guest, by the way, has gone on dozens of hurricane hunter missions, including Katrina. These are some of the photos he took during more than 1,000 hours he spent flying inside the storms. Amazing stuff. For 6 years, Lieutenant Colonel Chad Gibson flew as an aerial reconnaissance weather officer for the hurricane hunters. He flew into numerous hurricanes, including Katrina, and he was there 10 years ago today. Colonel, pleasure to have you on with us.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Take us back to 10 years ago tonight. You know, what the hurricane hunters were doing, what it was like for you being on board the planes and flying through this.
It's amazing it's been 10 years for one thing, but you know, during that time period, I flew it when it was Tropical Depression 10, and it's what we call tropical trash. I mean, it just really wasn't anything built there. So we were flying, you know, the Air Force Reserve or the hurricane hunters, and they fly the C-130HA. We call it low-level missions to determine the circulation. And once we find that circulation, then we go into what we call a fixed pattern, and that's where we get the 105-mile legs. It looks kind of like an X. We call it an alpha pattern. And when we first started flying TD-10, it just really wasn't there. There's no circulation. We just thought it was a group of thunderstorms that really wasn't going to form. And you have to keep looking that that was a busy year. So once that disturbance kind of petered out, we started looking at the next one, and then they renumbered it, and then all of a sudden it started kicking up again.
Right.
So when I flew it as a Tropical Depression 12, we started seeing that circulation. We still didn't really see just how much it was going to start to blow out over the Gulf of Mexico. But in our experience, you know, anytime you get that huge warm water, as we were just talking, when you hit, anything can happen. And so even the smallest disturbance, the butterfly effect, if you will, anything could really start to grow in the intensity very, very quickly. And that's what happened in 2005. But I'm just proud to have been called a citizen airman with those Air Force Reserve hurricane hunters.
And Chad, you know, you were saying in your position, you know, you were responsible for telling them where to go, where to drop. You have the drops on there with you today.
Yeah.
And so you're responsible for telling these guys, okay, this is where it is, let it go now, right?
The aerial reconnaissance weather officers and meteorologists on board, and they direct the aircraft toward the center of the storm. As I mentioned, once we get into the alpha pattern trying to find that fix, we'll fly a constant pressure altitude, right at 700 millibars, which is about 9,900 feet in a standard atmosphere. But when you start looking at storm, guess what you're doing? The pressure's descending, we're descending. So what we want to do is we want to release these little weather stations in a can, we call the drops on. And it's got the parachute out. We'll direct these to be released usually in an eye wall in the center where we think where we see the wind shift, and then oftentimes in the eye wall as we're exiting the storm. And that gives us a real max wind for the surface at our flight level, and a good ability to what the lowest pressure is. And so that's the value of what the hurricane hunters do. You look at it on the satellite, but until you really look inside of it, it's kind of like going to the doctor and getting an x-ray. You know there's a tumor there, but until you take that biopsy, you don't know what you really got.
It's a biopsy of a storm for sure. I think we actually have some viewer questions for you this evening, because rarely do we get some insight like you. Ralph writes this: at the early stages of Katrina, did you believe that this storm would be as bad as it actually was? I
did not, and most of my peers did not as well. We looked at it, and of course we take every storm and every disturbance seriously. You got to remember, as an Air Force reservist, we're high school teachers. We're working in all the factories. We're there with you in the communities, and I lost everything I had in Hurricane Katrina. So we have definitely, we hurt when the community hurts. And when we saw this, we didn't see at that time it was really going to build up. As a matter of fact, we had a very busy season. We had a few people, including myself, my boss was going, you know what, take a couple days off. I think this is going to die out. Don't worry about it. And then it hit the Gulf of Mexico, and they were calling, hey, you need us back? You know? So, but we were there 24 hours a day. The reservists were right in the middle of the storm. So, but no, we did not expect it to get as big as it did at that point. But without that data, you would see that that band broaden out 30%.
Right.
So it definitely helps the forecast get very accurate.
That's for sure.
I think one of the more remarkable aspects of the data that was retrieved from these drop-ons was the vertical profile of the wind. And right before Katrina made landfall, I remember reading some of the data coming from these instruments showing a wind maximum in just above the boundary layer, say about 1,000 feet above the ground, over 200 miles per hour. Wow. Yet the wind in the lowest 1,000 feet was way less than that, less than half that. Wow. So there was a remarkable structure where you had a peak wind speed just basically at cloud level. And if some of those wind gusts were able to make it down to the ground, unfortunately they weren't, we would have seen
Would be
damage a
something bigger.
lot worse than we did.
And it's
we
hard
were
to
lucky.
think that we could have seen damage that was worse.
We were lucky. The thing was spinning like a top.
Well, that's it.
And the storm surge is really what did it. I mean,
Well, yeah,
with
yeah.
all the energy it started building over the Gulf of Mexico, we really weren't worried as much about winds as that storm surge. We could see that right in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. Going, wow, this storm surge could be bad.
And Colonel, this Katrina was personal for you.
It was.
Your home was impacted. Your neighborhood was impacted.
We lost more than 20 people, individuals in my subdivision. It was it hit home. And I had 9.5 feet of water from the storm surge. We're elevation about 16 feet. So just to give you an idea how large that storm surge was. And it was definitely something that I appreciate the Gulf Coast communities. They pitched in and really came together to help. And the Air Force Reserve was there again with the 920th doing relief missions and rescue missions out of Louisiana. There's a lot of wonderful stories out of a tragic event.
And answering the call of duty before, during, and after, huh?
Yes,
Colonel, real pleasure to have you here this
Thank you
evening.
so much.
It was great to get the insight, and appreciate all of you sending your questions.